industrial accidents, ancient
solving
poisoners,
crime,
poison
chemical
prevention.
spills. This is Toxic History.
This is pharmacist Frank Paluchek. He's a clinical professor emeritus at the University of Illinois Chicago Retsky College of Pharmacy and AACT emeritus.
This is going to be a very shallow, surface skimming dive across the widest body of water I could find. It's an overview of the history of toxicologic self-experimentation, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start with how did all this come up for me, at least. And at least one person I saw who's sitting here attending has knowledge of this. I was a pharmacist in the Drug Information Center at the University of Illinois Hospital when it was running a residency program, and the Drug Information Center was where pharmacy residents took overnight call for the hospital, and they also did research. And I'm aware of this study being done because I saw them the next day, and I heard all the complaints about the ipecac-induced vomiting and the other pleasantries that they enjoyed in participating in this prospective controlled trial comparing charcoal with cathartic to ipecac. And those 12 healthy volunteers mentioned right down in the bottom here of us at the beginning in subjects and methods, these were, to my knowledge, at least one, if not all of them, had been told by their residency director they had to participate in this trial because it's hard to recruit volunteers to voluntarily puke all over the place. And that was all well and good, and it ultimately did get published. Now, this was early in the year that I left and went away and went to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy to get my PharmD degree. Now, when I came back in 2 years and became a faculty member at the University of Illinois, we were still recruiting pharmacy postgraduate trainees and students. And yes, for those of you that might not recognize the person in the bottom right corner, that was me back when I had hair and it wasn't white. And I was one of the subjects in this trial looking at the antecubital administration of 10 cc's of calcium chloride, 10% calcium chloride. And my experience with that is why I remain to this day a strong advocate of using calcium chloride whenever possible outside of neonatal infants with scalp or foot veins insertions who, when I'm treating a life-threatening event that calcium may be useful for. But I've watched it get done. I did it. And I went on to have other moments in my career. While I had been with Toxicon and before we had an Office for the Protection of Human Subjects at the University of Illinois, we all participated in many of each other's studies, and a couple of selected examples of this. I was one of the patient volunteers and study investigators, and we actually got an award from AACT to present this a long time ago for whole bowel irrigation versus K-Xlate in the treatment of simulated lithium exposure. And I refused to participate in the inhalational administration of mucomist with Tylenol overdose protocol doses, much bigger doses than is when it's used as a mucolytic, which I would, in my mind, both of these were the two least tolerable things I ever participated in or saw. The sorbitol and its resultant conversion into carbon dioxide in the stomach is awful. And I just, no one was happy with the neck. I myself have had I allowed ED staff during the early days of the AIDS epidemic in 84 and 85 to inject me, and later on in the 80s, early 90s, with large volume single injection site phosphenotoin, because in those patients who oftentimes had little or no muscle mass whatsoever from the wasting syndrome, trying to give them the 10 to 13 shots that might be needed to load somebody on phosphenotoin for seizures was extremely painful, and the drug was water soluble. I had pictures, old-fashioned slides of these, but I can no longer find somebody who can convert those into digital files, so maybe I just didn't try hard enough. And then when Tylenol extended relief came out, I was happily self-administered 200 milligrams per kilo because that was our recommendations for staying at home in children. And if we could tell kids to stay at home, I ought to feel comfortable with it. And I did that, and we found a very nice routine curve that didn't look as if it had any kind of unusual absorption effects. A huge disclaimer here. I ignored a gigantic confounder at the time because the people who know me very well know I drink 3.5 to 4 liters of soda a day. And that sheer volume of fluid compared to a normal adult probably allowed dissolution to occur more normally. And I didn't get any of the bezoars that we see these days. So all this is going on. I see these things, and then a case came along. I'm not going to cover this in great detail, but it was the husband of a wife who had suffered severe ciguatera poisoning from eating bad barracuda in Jamaica. And he had had intercourse with her one day, a couple of days prior, and he came in and he asked the tox docs, "Do you have any idea what this is?" And he had desquamated his groin. We're very excited. This sounds like it could be potentially reportable. And as soon as we get into the literature, we find that within a couple months prior, the old J-Tox Clintox, now known as Clintox, had published a case report of this at a nearby hospital in Chicago. Why Chicago has these two cases in the 80s, I don't know, but we did. And we were a bit dejected. But in looking through this to try and find more, what else can I find? I came across this case, which was an unforeseen complication of home parenteral antibiotic therapy. And this is something that has got me on a topic I've talked about before, which is sexually transmitted poisonings. And in this particular case, in trying to decide whether the exposure in a woman to penicillin from her husband and intercourse, whether this caused her immediate allergic reaction. And it's buried in this paper in the back, but a seminal fluid sample was not obtained from the husband. However, one of the physicians did voluntarily take a 4 gram dose of mesosilin, and seminal fluid obtained from that individual, the investigator self-experimenter, demonstrated significant concentrations of mesosilin. So now I've got personal experience. I'm beginning to think it's much more widespread. And then just a couple months ago on this very webinar group, Tox History, there was a presentation on tomatoes as a poisonous plant. And I thank the in-depth research that went into it, identifying Colonel Robert Gibbon, who publicly in front of a large crowd of people on the steps of a North Carolina courthouse ate the tomato and didn't die. This has not deterred me from disliking and avoiding tomatoes at all costs because I still don't like the taste of them. To me, it's a toxic taste. All right, all that well and good. I am not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I rely to some extent, well, actually, I bow down and kneel in awe to the publication on the far left by Lawrence Altman. Who goes first? He reviews over 460, he includes 465 cases of documented medical and scientific literature with people who experimented on themselves. The one by Arson Fix is a very detailed bibliography of hundreds of citations of examples of it, not very much it's not really a narrative text. It's just more a very large bibliography. And then there's a nicely written paper, Alan Weiss, in the Texas Heart Institute Journal recently on this. And I think that it's worth looking at. I have the paper. It's behind. It may not be readily accessible to anybody. So at the end, I have my email address, which is my last name alone, all small case, at gmail.com. And you're all welcome to. I can happily distribute it because of the access that I had. So these are really where you should get in knowledge from. Now, for some background, just self-experimenting in general, 17 of the Nobel Prize winners were self-experimented, and 80 of them got the prize for something they did to themselves directly. Unfortunately, none of these were for somebody who was looking at antidotes or something else to do with poisoning in the manner that I chose to define it. Examples: self-appendectomy with local anesthesia by Dr. Kane, blood transfusions. Bogdanov had multiple episodes of taking transfusions from other humans and then ultimately died because of incompatibility. Dr. Stark, who starved himself in the manner to deprive himself of some essential nutrients and he uncovered scurvy. A self-cardiac catheterization through the jugular by Dr. Forsman that directly led to a Nobel Prize in 1956. And then the H. pylori induced gastritis ulcers, the proof that H. pylori did it by Dr. Marshall in 2005, another Nobel Prize winner. And he drank a broth made up of live Helicobacter pylori cultures and then got very sick. The vast majority of self-experimenters in medicine or science have been people who've been using the two biggest categories: infectious agents, they've infected themselves, or they ingested radionuclides for a variety of reasons. As a broad category with dozens of different items within it, there is pharmacologic or pharmacology stuff, but not in no one quite as big as these. Now, I think it interesting, and I'll review in a second, there is actually no official ban nor ethical review requirements for self-experimentation. And of the 465 documented cases that we have access to, and there are another 25 to 50, so over 500, it depends on how much you trust things published before the 1800s, there's only been 8 recorded deaths. Now, to me, the first thought I have when I see or look at this is that well, maybe there was no recorded deaths because the the study investigator was unable to um, publish the circumstances of the patient's death in self-experimenters. So do with that as you want. The one document we have guiding medical research is that addresses this at all is 1947, the Nuremberg Principles. And it specifically states in item number 5 mentioned here, no experiment shall be conducted where there is an a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physician also serves as a subject. But the Declaration of Helsinki, the 1974 Public Law 93-349, establishing the National Commission for Protection of Human Subjects, Biomedical or Behavioral Research, the 2008 Good Clinical Practices Acts, none of them mention self-experimentation in a manner to say it should or should not be done. And then there's a very nice study. I don't know if it'll ever be published. You can find it online. I also have access to it, 2018 from Harvard, the pre-publication review of a survey of scientific self-experimentation. They actually surveyed the National Academy of Sciences, the European Academy of Sciences, another one, and found that a third of the large of all scientists contacted in terms of IRBs they worked with, a third of IRBs said it's not an ethical issue. Go ahead and do it if you want. A third said it had to have ethical review, and a third said nothing at all. So we have actually got nothing here, which when I was researching this, I had been led to believe we couldn't do it at all anymore. I knew we couldn't do students because of potential coercion without ethical review, but so on. But what about tox? I said tox, and I've been everywhere but tox, but like I said, I went across as big a body of water as I could find. And there aren't a lot, but a couple interesting things came up for me. One, I'm a charcoal file. I love charcoal. I use charcoal. I promote it all the time. I'm sorry for all you people that are wrong, but I mean, I'm sorry for all the people that disagree with me. But this guy, Pierre Flores Toury, I have no idea if I'm saying that right. I speak Spanish, not French. In 1813 or 1831, or maybe it was 1852, because the different textbooks that identify him as the guy proving that charcoal worked as a decontamination method. This guy was an apothecary slash pharmacist, but apothecaries were also surgeons, so God only knows at the exact time. Before the French Academy of Sciences ingested 15 times the lethal dose of strychnine and co-ingested activated charcoal he made. We don't know the actual dose, and that dose, who knows it, the lethal dose has changed over time. We don't know how he made his activated charcoal, and we actually don't know how much he ingested. But to everybody's shock, he lived, and so here's a very public demonstration of I can do this, and it worked. Since that time, there are very poorly collected and documented examples of trying to reproduce this for charcoal with other agents and or the same strychnine. And well, I'd like cheap puns. There were dark results. And I will get to that in a sec, but what about Michel Bertrand, or should I say M. period Bertrand, because maybe we've been calling the wrong guy the father of charcoal, which I did not know. There's a gentleman, a physician named Charles Bertrand. Many of his stuff was abbreviated M for Monsieur Bertrand, who in 1813 it had a published treatise that has been referenced. It's in the bottom, it's the first of the bottom three references here. Documented his taking on an empty stomach powdered arsenic acid and a half glass of very strong powdered charcoal with lime blossom water, and and then he describes what happened to him subsequent to all that. And he did well. He survived. He had some bad moments. He repeated the dose, and he said this is a good thing. He went on to publish in 1815 the advantages of using powdered charcoal in the treatment of self-poisoning with the use of verdigris, which these were copper and copper salts from treating copper metal to create different salts. I can only imagine when you use the word verdigris that meant copper sulfate. And then again in 1817, he published a manual of the medical for poisonings. Now, he probably should be the father, but he never did this in front of a large crowd, and he only published it. And back in those time, unlike our modern social media area of immediate, instantaneous dissemination of however poorly it was done research, maybe it just wasn't known outside of a few people in France, but it was known by somebody we all know very well, and that was a treatise in response by Orfila, where he says, in translation, it is probable charcoal's antidote for a very great number of metallic salts. We believe this is extremely dangerous to propagate, and full confidence in such results, physicians might employ these ineffective means and lose precious time. And here is my first great opportunity to say we've always had people with the same data say two different things within tox and every other aspect of medicine. And here is one where they argued about its use in metallic salts, and it worked. It probably, without considering dose, it's hard to say how well it worked. Orfila then went on and is described as being invited by Dr. Ellenberger, who swallowed 1,500 milligrams of morphine sulfate along with his universal antidote simultaneously and lived, which surprised. He was challenged by Orfila to allow for a time delay. He said, well, it always works. And then a few weeks later, there's a newspaper article talking about how he died after taking 650 milligrams and delaying the ingestion of charcoal of his antidote. I mistyped there, 15 to 30 minutes. That universal antidote, by the way, is magnesium carbonate. Current self-poisoners, and I just realized the time, so if Adam's playing music, I hear it. Alan Blair, 1933, University of Alabama, to settle the debate about whether black widow spider envenomations had a toxin that caused human symptoms, took out a black widow spider and put it on his forefinger and left it there until it finally bit him. And after several very painful days under hospital supervision and care, he described and he was noted and seen and observed, and he proved that it did seem to occur. We have this guy, and maybe the snake venomation lecture coming up. We'll cover him. Tim, I don't know how to say it, Fried. He has been bitten or self-injected 856 times now. There are multiple publications featuring him. He's polishing up how he looks over the years, by the way. And he's actually working with a drug firm right now where he's allowing his antibody. He's basically a monoclonal antibody factory for a universal antivenom. My recent most fave, again, was Jack Dunbacher, a grad student of ornithology in New Guinea, was studying the mating habits of birds of paradise, caught a bird in his nets, it bit and clawed him. He took his bleeding finger and put it in his mouth and developed numbness and burning. He went back after investigating some of the other alkaloids he had handled with his fingers that day and finding nothing in any of those plants or other materials, found another bird, took one of its feathers from it somehow, and then put it in his mouth to test. Word of mouth says he not only put it in his mouth, but he accidentally brushed one of his eyes with the same finger that he was handling the feather with and developed discordant features in vision between the two eyes. And that was because this is, of course, the patui bird, which is the most venomous and first discovered poisonous bird, which acquires its poison background by the ingestion of poisonous beetles. Even now, we still have self-experimenters. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this website or this group, but this is the Rapid Deployment Vaccine Collaborative formed because of COVID in March of 2022. And there's about 20 researchers in this group that will develop and self-administer an experiment with inhalational vaccines against COVID viruses. And they are also well described. My opinion about all this, I'm rushing a bit, is this quote. I love this quote. For a better understanding of the ethics involved, I turn to the field of immunology, and this is from the Texas Heart Journal group. Saul Benison, Oral History of the Curmudgeonly Tom Rivers, immediately appeals to me. 1922 to 1955, found this quotation from either Rivers or Benison. I know that if anyone ever came up to me and asked me to take an untried vaccine, I'd ask, have you taken it? And by God, if that person said no, I'd tell them to go to hell. I really don't. I am more than willing and have participated as a volunteer in current vaccine trials. Last one was RSV at University of Illinois. I'm not going to spend time here. We just had a great talk about Wetterhand, but I think what she did in allowing people to study her was commendable. And I'm going to finish with this to echo Dr. Jeffrey at the end. He was not a self-poisoner, he was not an experimenter. But in this era, when the scientific method is besieged, and we're not besieging the interpreters, the analyzers, or the presenters of the data, I think it's good to remember this. Believing new science, as Max Planck stated in his very famous quote, or doubting old science, because none of us have seen polio or anything like it anymore, will always be subject to the gold standard test. And that gold standard test is, will the belief or disbelief grow and maintain with the new generation after all the people who are wrong die off? And I'm going to stop there.